Thank you so much for agreeing to spend a couple of minutes with me talking about your experience.
Thank you for asking me to. I appreciate it.
So we're going to kick off with, you have a very interesting background. You didn't start in data centers, which I think is a lot of our experiences. So how did you transition into the data center industry?
I don't know anybody who grew up saying, I want to be in data centers. I think we all got here by accident. I fell in because I had a colleague that I'd known who was in the industry, who'd worked as a salesperson and branched out into brokerage. And so he wanted to bring someone in who had a real estate background and understood real estate leasing. It was completely new to me and found it fascinating. I'm an architect's daughter, so I just really enjoyed understanding finally how things get to my phone and what the cloud really is, and that we're just using somebody else's computer.
Similar to my story, I found everybody knows the cloud, but the actual fact that it has this huge infrastructure, I mean, the economy would not exist, right, without data centers. I found it baffling that how does this secret world exist and nobody really knows about it?
You drive by these unnamed buildings with these huge pieces of infrastructure on the roof and things and have no idea what they are. I explained to someone subsea cable once, and that all of our internet connection runs under the ocean, and it just blows the mind that that's actually what's going on.
Right, even with my partner, we were watching a video on YouTube of the ship carrying the cable, and you think, really, this is how they do it?
It's right.
Something that you pioneer, which is a wonderful initiative, is more diversity in our industry. What would you say is the importance of diversity in not just data centers, but any industry?
I think it is any industry. And I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I think we need to start talking about it from a profit standpoint. We need to start talking about why it's good for a business, not just in an altruistic sense. And I think when we look at the statistics, it's incredibly clear that when we start employing diversity and inclusion intentionally in a business, we see EBITDA go up 30%. I mean, if you and I could take our own personal money and guarantee that it would grow 30% over a year, we'd all do it, right? And understanding that it's not just diversity of gender or LGBTQ, it's really thought and background and perspective and bringing new ideas to the table. The worst thing that I could do as a leader is hire a bunch of people that look, think, and act exactly like I do. The first thing that I want to do when I'm hiring a team is hire people that make up for my shortcomings, for people that do what I do, maybe not so well, really well. And that's what diversity looks like. And I think the intention behind it.
You touched on a little bit about encouraging more people to come into the sector. Something that is a big problem for us is skill set shortage. You've seen organizations do to encourage more labor force to enter this market?
It has to start from the top down. We need to look at hiring differently. And I think that we need to understand how people apply for jobs. I learned something on a panel that I didn't know before recently, that when men apply for a job, as long as they meet 50% of the criteria, they'll apply for the job. Women won't apply unless they feel that they hit 100% of the criteria for a job.
Really?
It's a need to value soft skills more. We often require a bachelor's degree when it's not necessarily required for the job. We need to broaden our scope to people who have the capacity to excel in a job, not necessarily already know how to do it. I think it's really interesting that certain companies, Compass being one of them, and one of the women that I've spoken with at iMasons, there's been a real push in this industry to bring women on as PMs. I love this story that somebody brought up on a panel, was that she hired a woman to be a PM because she had been a military wife her entire adult life. And she could pick up and move a household in a week. I mean, talk about somebody who can execute on multitasking and get things done. Looking at someone's background of what they're capable of and what their skill sets are, maybe not necessarily what they went to school to do or what job they've had before, I think is really interesting way to rearrange how we decide who we're hiring. Often, at the very top, from C-suite down, we see people hiring the same people they've worked with at the company before and the company before that and the guy they went to college with. And it does such a disservice to everyone when we're hiring people that look, think, act and have the same background as us.
Yeah, 100% I agree. And can you give maybe some advice to people who are interested to look into this industry and they do see this obstacle and this barrier in front of them?
We all have to know our strengths. We all have to know our weaknesses. I certainly know mine. If you want a really elaborate Excel spreadsheet, I'm not your girl. That's not where my strengths are. My strengths are this, right? Are talking to people and building relationships. When we know what our strengths are, we know what we enjoy. If we move forward into the parts of this business that speak to us, we're going to be successful. I think that we need to start having higher level conversations about who we bring in and their different lenses and what they bring to the table. It's such a big problem to solve. And there are so many different verticals and segments within this industry. I mean, what you've done and what I've done are completely different, but we both work in the same industry. There's a certain lack of women in engineering that has to start at the education level, that has to start younger. We need to start recruiting. College is too late. I think we need to start talking about STEM much earlier. I think top down, you have to see it too. We need to see women at the C-suite. We need to see women on the board. We need to see diverse, not just gender, but in every way, in order to associate, well, if she can do it, if they can do it, if he can do it, I can do it.
You've been in this industry for 10 years and you've spent a lot of it in big companies and looking at potential locations, teaching some clients about locations of data centers and site selection. So it'd be great to understand from you what kind of the factors and considerations play a major role in determining possible optimal locations for hyperscalers, for example.
There's two answers to that. One of them is very boring, but very true. Sales. Sales tells us where to go.
When you say sales, like you look at the customers and you say, okay, this is the potential customer pool that we'll have if we move into this location.
Okay. Absolutely. And any site selection is done based on what is the pipeline in that region. Now in this wild world that we're in that is so different from when you and I started, power is everything. Where is their power? And when is it available? And it's really driving almost all of our decisions at this point is the access to the utility or self-generation.
Okay, interesting. Power definitely is something. There was an interview that you did earlier where you mentioned that power is scarce and that's why tier 2 edge locations are being considered. Do you have some regions that you see are being hotter than others for data center operators or end users?
The idea of tier 2, tier 3 regions is sort of being thrown out the window within the last couple of months. The industry has seen a huge push in looking for space and power anywhere that it's available, anywhere in the US, really. I think the major markets will stay major markets, but we're also looking outside of those for solutions because there is such scarcity of power. Africa is an emerging market. Connectivity is certainly an issue. It's not the same world it was even a year ago. I'm very intrigued on where we're going to be a year from now.
So you mentioned things have changed so drastically, and even a year from now, that things could look very drastically different. In the same interview earlier, you mentioned users are looking at maybe a 60-month capacity planning cycle. Do you see that this is still the case, or is it now longer?
I think that it's longer. I think specifically in Europe, we're talking about things in certainly 2027, when we're going to see power return to the grid. I think that we're having to do now 120-month planning, but very reactionary at the moment. There is almost a scramble between the CSPs of who's going to get the market share of the power that's out there. Very forward looking, and we're not seeing it slow down in any way. In fact, we're seeing everything accelerate.
Such a crazy world that we're living in with the data growth. It seems to be higher and higher and higher growth. Then you have like quantum computing. And I saw Microsoft was pioneering synthetic DNA data storage, which I just blew my mind when I read about that.
Absolutely. And you had brought up quantum computing when we were talking about this. I think I understand 5% of really what's going on. We're seeing so many different things specifically with AI right now is driving so much. But when I got into this industry, doing a megawatt at a time was a big deal. And now we're starting to talk about gigawatts. it's sort of mind blowing, but also understanding even with that, the data center industry is only 2.5% of the utility consumption in the world. So even at 2.5% of the energy consumption, we are still, in my mind, responsible for innovation. We're still responsible for pushing the rest of the world in self-generation and sustainability. And we are going to innovate and change how the world sees energy consumption and generation.
Can you touch a little bit more into different sustainability factors that you've experienced in the industry being pioneered?
I think that having a sustainability program is obviously implemented everywhere. I think sustainability is a buzzword. I think that renewable power is table stakes at this point, especially in Europe. Everything that we procure is renewable power. There is no other alternative. And I think that's fantastic. But just offsetting by buying renewables is not enough, obviously. And there's so much discussion about generation of green power and what that's going to look like. And is that fuel cells? Is that hydrogen? Is that small nuclear reactors? There's so many really fascinating discussions going on right now. And I think we're going to see tremendous change in the next 3 to 5 years on what that looks like due to scarcity. I think that's driving that. And that will be our industry pushing the rest of the world.
Rhea, thank you so much for answering the questions and giving me your time today. I really appreciated it.
Thank you so much.